This is Bob McAuliffe, and this is A Child for Hire, the Victim's Story. As I've said in my introductory video, from the age of 4, for a period of around 20 years, I was the victim of sustained sexual, physical, and emotional abuse at the hands of many perpetrators across the UK, mainly to make money for others. These podcasts are going to be completely honest, unfiltered, and unedited. At times, I may look unsure of myself or nervous, and that is because, simply, I'm telling my story for the first time. So my first podcast is going to cover the age bracket of 4 to 4.5, and you may wonder how I've pinpointed that so accurately. This in the main is due to a conversation I had several years ago with my first abuser, my Uncle Mike. But there'll be more about that later. First, I think it's important that you understand my living situation at the time. So we're talking about London in the early 70s. Victorian buildings were not the desirable buildings that they are today. They were basically buildings that had been split into bedsits, with a caretaker's flat on the ground floor. My mother and father were the caretaker of the building and had the caretaker's flat. Their job was to keep the building in good shape and to collect the rent money. Now, these buildings were altered in a very simple manner. So the rooms had electric, but the common areas had no electric and no lighting. My mother and father also had full-time jobs. My mother was a nurse's aide. My dad was a doorman at a posh London hotel. Next door to us was a spinster, Miss Ellen, who was living in a property that had been handed down to her through generations to her. And she had lodgers that basically helped with her living costs and the upkeep of her building. One of the tenants in our building, who had the top floor bedsit, was my Uncle Mike. Now, my Uncle Mike was a real live wire. He was somebody that people gravitated towards. He liked loud music. He was always smoking, always had a cigarette in his hand. And he was my dad's best friend. So because my mum and dad were working full time, it fell to Uncle Mike to babysit me. And I think you can tell which direction this story is going in, but this story does take a turn. So the first time that my Uncle Mike babysat me, I had a normal experience. Uncle Mike took me up to his room, put some loud music on, we sang, we danced, it was fun. He gave me a toy truck. And he said to me, I'm giving you this because you've been such a good boy. Now I'm going to take you downstairs and put you to bed. Now, at the age of 4, I was used to changing myself and getting into bed. But Uncle Mike insisted that he had to change me, and he had to put me in my pajamas, and he had to put me in bed. And while I was in bed, he had to make sure that all of the sheets inside the bed, while I was in it, were straight and tidy so that I could sleep well. I didn't really think anything of it at the time. I don't think any child really would think anything of it at the time. The second time Uncle Mike babysat me was a little bit more stranger. It was a hot, sunny day, and as usual, the music was on. My Uncle Mike was smoking, and he was like, it's very hot in here. Let's take off our jumpers and trousers. Again, didn't think anything of it. And Uncle Mike was like, copy these poses, and he was doing muscle man poses and getting me to copy them. And he was like, remember these for the future, these are going to stand you in good stead. And again, I didn't think anything of it. And this time I got a toy police car. The third time that Uncle Mike babysat me was when things took a very short turn. My parents were going out after work, and so Uncle Mike was looking after me for the whole night. So, as usual, the night started off the same as always, listening to music, playing games, laughing, joking. Uncle Mike said, "You're staying with me tonight, so you need to go to bed like a big boy." Now, I had no idea what this meant, going to bed like a big boy, but going to bed like a big boy meant going to bed wearing nothing at all. Now, this was fine until my Uncle Mike got into bed with me, and that's when, for the first time in my life, I felt really uncomfortable. I was not scared, I was just unsure of what the situation was. Nothing happened. The next day, everything was normal. And then my mother and father decided that they were going away for the day, and my Uncle Mike was going to look after me for the full day. So that involved going out and about in London. My Uncle Mike was drinking with friends. We went back to the bedsit with his friends. They were drinking, he was drinking. Eventually, one by one, they started leaving. It was just me and Uncle Mike. And Uncle Mike said to me, "Get ready for bed, big boy style." And I was like, "Okay, not a problem." And then Uncle Mike got a camera out. And he said, "Remember the poses that I showed you?" And I went, "Yes." And he went, "I want you to do those poses one at a time, and let's take some pictures." Now, as a child, thinking, I don't know if I should be doing this, but it's my Uncle Mike telling me to do so. And I can remember the flashes, and I can remember being cold, I can remember being scared, and I remember thinking to myself, I need to go to sleep. I need to go to sleep. If I go to sleep, I'll be okay. So Uncle Mike finished taking his photographs and got into bed, and he's like, "Come on, it's time to go to sleep." I don't think you could imagine a 4-year-old more scared than I was at that moment. When I got into bed, I remember the smell of the alcohol and the smell of the cigarettes and the body odour. And he wanted to hug me, and he kept hugging me, and I kept getting hotter, and I kept getting sweatier, and it was a combination of being uncomfortable and scared. But eventually I must have fallen asleep. I woke up in the morning feeling kind of funny, and I didn't know why. I never thought anything of it. My mum and dad came home. I remember having breakfast. I remember getting changed, and I went to sit on the floor to play with my toys. And bearing in mind that every time I visited with Uncle Mike, I got a toy. I had quite a collection of corgi cars, and I could feel pain, and I didn't know what this pain was. But again, as a child, unless it's really hurting you, and you're crying and you're screaming in pain, you don't do anything about it. You just carry on as normal. So this whole scenario of Uncle Mike babysitting carried on for months. My mum and dad were doing night shifts, and Uncle Mike was to babysit me. And so Uncle Mike said to me, "You need to come upstairs. We're going to play a game, and we're going to play with my friend." I went into the room, and there was this very old man with scraggly hair and missing teeth, and he probably didn't look as bad as I remember. I think I remember how he looked, but he was completely naked, and I can just remember the pure fear. And as I backed towards the open door, Mike pushed me in and shut it. I was so scared and so terrified, I just didn't know how to react. I stood there, stock fear. Uncle Mike was going, "I've got you a fire engine, I've got you a fire engine. Go and meet my friend Bill." And I just couldn't move. And as Uncle Mike was undressing me, I was getting more and more scared. And I knew that something bad was going to happen. And although I didn't understand what was going to happen, I just had a feeling. And all I remember is letting out the biggest scream that I've ever let out in my life and waking up in bed. And what had happened is I had screamed for so long that I had passed out. Nothing was mentioned about it, nothing was said about it. But again, I woke up in the morning, I felt sore. Uncle Mike was to babysit me later in the week, and I could just feel the sheer terror building inside of me, and I didn't know what this feeling was. So at the end of the week, Uncle Mike arrived with his friends and picked me up, put me under his arm, and said, "Okay, I've got Robert for the night. See you in the morning." And he carried me like a piece of luggage under his arm upstairs and locked his room door. And I was in a room with four men. Now, all of them were drunk, the music was loud, and the camera came out. And this time, they took photos of me being abused, being forced to have sex with these four men. This was including my Uncle Mike. I remember it in great detail simply for the fact that the odours, the smells, the colour of the carpet, the twisting feeling in my brain of what was happening comes back to me on a regular basis. Certain smells will trigger. A bright orange in the supermarket will make me think of the carpet. A smoky, hot, sticky smell will make me back to that 4-year-old boy. And I remember in great detail everything that was done at the time. And I actually hard to comprehend a 4-year-old knowing what was going on was wrong and not being able to do anything about it, but as an adult looking back and still not being able to do anything about it. The crux that brought all this to an end was that my mum told me the day before Uncle Mike was going to babysit me that he was coming to babysit me the next day. And all night I had trouble sleeping. All day I was nervous. I was uncomfortable. I was on edge. And my mum said to me, "In half an hour Uncle Mike will be here and he's looking after you." And I remember taking off out the back door of the property and running so fast. And I mean so fast that I was out of breath. And it felt like I was running as fast as the wind, and probably as a four-wheeler it wasn't. But I was running so fast, and I tripped. And I fell so hard when I tripped that a pebble from the garden embedded itself into my forehead, and I still have an indentation here in my forehead where the pebble was embedded, and I had fell with such force that the pebble would not come out of my head. And Mrs. Ellen had heard me fall, and she had come through the fence and went, "What's happened? What's happened?" And I went, "I've hurt my head, I've hurt my head, I've hurt my head." And she grabbed me and picked me up, and she was trying to get this pebble out of my head, and it just wouldn't budge, it wouldn't move. She took me into her kitchen, and she got tweezers and tried to remove it, and it just would not budge. Now, I don't know if it was fate. I don't know if it was just somebody looking over me or basically going, "We're going to save you from this tonight." But the pebble wouldn't come out. And I ended up having to go to hospital to have this pebble removed. And obviously, my mum couldn't take me, so Miss Ellen took me. And because Miss Ellen took me to the hospital to have the pebble removed, I stayed the night with Miss Ellen. The next day, when Miss Ellen took me home, there was arguing going on upstairs between my dad and my Uncle Mike and my mum and other tenants of the building. And I didn't know what was going on. All I knew that was I had a very sore head. And Miss Ellen said, "I don't know what's happening, but go and play with your toys." And she went upstairs. And not long after that, to me, it feels like a matter of days. It was probably longer. We were moving to Scotland. And I didn't understand that. And I remember crying so much when I was told, and going to Miss Ellen, and Miss Ellen, giving me treats, etc., and saying it's going to be fine. And I never understood how that came about. Now, I will say I still have the indentation in my head here from where the pebble was. And obviously, as a child, you have soft bones. And if you have something that causes trauma to the bones, significant trauma, it can still be seen for years later. And that is still there. And it reminds me constantly of what happened to me in London. So, I mentioned at the very beginning of this that I had a conversation with my Uncle Mike several years ago, and it turned out that my Uncle Mike had cancer. It was terminal, and he was atoning for all of the things that he did wrong, and he wanted to speak to me. And I had always refused to speak to Uncle Mike as I'd gotten older. As a child, I felt that I had no choice, and you just would put on the phone and you said hello and what you were doing, that was it. As I got older, I always found a reason not to have to speak to my Uncle Mike. So when I got this call out of the blue, and this voice was on the other end of the line, it sent shivers down my spine. And he went, "It's Mike." And I thought to myself, "My Uncle Mike?" And he went, "I'm not your uncle." And I went, "Well, who are you?" And he was like, "Oh, I'm Mike. I was your dad's friend. I was one of the tenants within the property." I went, "So we're not related?" And he went, "No, we were never related, but your dad and your mum wanted you to call me Uncle Mike." And he said, "I want to talk about what happened when you were a child." I'm not sure if you remember. And at that point, we'll be honest, I burst into floods of tears and I, through crying and difficulty talking, etc., managed to get a few words out and saying, of course I did. And he said, um, obviously I'm sorry. And that took me aback and I was like, how can you be sorry? And I confronted him and I said things that I wanted to say, such as, you took my childhood away from me, you changed the course of my life, you made things so much more difficult than they needed to be for me growing up and interacting with others. And he went, I'm not the only person to blame. And I just thought, you're not blaming me. I was a child. How can you be blaming me? And he went, I'm not blaming you. He went, you have to know that I was paying your parents' rent. And my heart has never hurt as much as that moment of being told that, in effect, for giving me to this man to do what he wanted, they were being paid money. I don't forgive Uncle Mike, or as I should call him, Mike. I told him I didn't forgive him. I recanted more than he was willing to acknowledge, but eventually did acknowledge. I told him I'd seen the photos not that long ago, which was the truth. I found a porn stash belonging to my father, and in amongst the porn stash were photographs of me as a child in the nude, doing various poses, and photos of me with other men. And I shouldn't say the word with other men because I wasn't a man. I was a child. I was pretty much a baby. And I remember seeing these photos and thinking to myself, why does my father have them? And that explains itself in future years. As I got older, I understood more, and I'll talk about that in detail more in another podcast. But seeing those photos vividly brought back the memories of what happened with Uncle Mike, his friends, and others. And the more I thought back, and the more I pictured where people were from, Miss Ellen's lodgers were some of the people that abused me through Uncle Mike. When I remember North London, a sense of relief and a sense of sadness on not seeing Miss Ellen again. But looking back on it and understanding now that that was when things first happened, it hurts. And it hurts in a way that is hard to explain. Um, the hurt is a deep longing, and it's a longing for innocence, if that makes sense. I don't have the childhood that people had, where it was all about having fun, playing with friends, getting muddy, being naughty, and I never experienced that. I experienced a childhood of fear and hurt and distrust and not knowing what each day would hold. And I think to this day that longing is still there. And in my life I've had my childish moments and my little tantrums, etc. And I think it comes out every now and again simply for the fact that I couldn't do it when I was a child. And I don't know if this feeling will go away. I don't know if I'll ever forgive really. I know that sounds really stupid. Um, because at 4, what can you do? There's another. I go, could I have run away? Could I have hidden? Could I have done something differently? Could I have protected myself in a different way? Um, and it's hard to reconcile that I did one of those things that I effectively blame myself for something that I had no control over. And that's a hard thing to reconcile. And that's partly why I want to tell my story, because I'm hoping that by getting the words out and getting the emotions out and getting how I feel out will help me heal and reconcile the past. Uncle Mike is dead. My parents are dead. I'm sure the people that were the abusers at the time are all dead too. But it doesn't help because they're still in my head. They still visit me in my dreams. They still come to me every now and again. And it's something that I think that as much as I hope to heal, they will probably haunt me till the day that I die. Um, being a child is hard. And I don't think as a child you realize how hard being a child is. Being a child who's been abused is even harder. I really is trusting and not being able to trust all the way through my life. And the more things happen to me, the more this distrust is growing. I can't put into words the amount of hate that I have inside me for people who did nothing to protect me. People had to know what was going on. It was a period of 6 months. Uncle Mike explained that it was 6 months. It happened every week, sometimes 2, 3 times a week. I think everything was merged in my head, that it felt like a shorter span, and that's probably a good thing. At the same time, how can somebody be abused for so long in not a well hidden place and nobody know enough to put their hand up and go, I think there's something wrong. And that also hurts because through my life, I haven't had champions that have put themselves forward to go, that's wrong, stop. Don't get me wrong, I have good friends, I have a great partner, and I have people that want to have my back, but they did not know what was happening at the time, and they did not know what was going on. They weren't here. As much as they want to do something now to make me feel better, um, I don't think they can. I think the only person that can make myself feel better is me. And that's what I need to work on. And that's what I need to figure out. And I'm hoping that these podcasts will do that. And I'm hoping in some way these may help other people come to an understanding of their life. Um, so I'm going to sign off here. Um, I think it's been a bit more emotional than I expected it to be. My next podcast is going to cover my move to Scotland and what happened next, and it doesn't get any better. But if you're still interested and you want to know more, subscribe, and you'll know when the next podcast comes out. It'll probably be about a fortnight's time from today, which is the 8th of May. And if you have questions or you want to know something else from that period, message me or drop a comment in the box below, and I'll do my best to answer it as honestly as I can. So for now, I'm Bob McAuliffe. This is A Child for Hire, the victim story, and hopefully you'll subscribe, and I'll see you in the next podcast.